What's up, ego hackers? Welcome to the Cutting Edge Podcast. I'm your host, C.S. Joseph, and this is the March 2023 episode. In today's episode, we're going to be discussing God functions, and it's necessary to do so because I'm going to be releasing on YouTube Season 35, and Season 35 is the God functions. We're going to be discussing the God functions, what they are, how they affect people, and what they mean. But today's Cutting Edge, we're going to be discussing the God functions of the temples, as well as what their functional relationships are between the God functions, which is very, very important. I think this is necessary as we are continuing to unpack the octogram for everybody, because the octogram and the structure of the octogram is entirely based on whether or not you understand specifically what the God functions are and how they are affecting the temples. So yeah, be that as it may. As we enjoy Immortal in the chat telling us how flat the earth actually is, we're going to be... we have the four temples, and the four temples are naturally the ego temple, which is the soul temple, the unconscious temple, which is the heart temple, the subconscious temple, which is the mind temple, and the superego temple, which is the body temple, which makes up the four sides of the mind for humanity itself. Now, within the confines of the temples themselves, the temples basically are worshiping or setting all of their attention on two primary cognitive functions that represent each of the temples. For the sake of this discussion, I'm going to define the word or the term worship for you folks, because I regret not doing it recently. But basically, it is reverent honor or homage paid to God or a sacred personage or to any object regarded as sacred, formal or ceremonious, rendering such honor or homage. It is also a verb, to worship, which is to render religious reverence and homage to feel an adoring reverence or regard for any person or thing. And that's basically where it is. But the God functions represent these divine functions that each of the four temples actually end up serving or putting all of their attention on. I like to redefine words sometimes, and I think a more colloquial layman's definition of the word worship is to put a great amount of attention on. Attention is everything. Attention ultimately makes the world go round. And a lot of times people have a hard time with me saying this, and that's why I've been saying it a lot in my content recently. But attention is everything. Attention is the most important, other than time, attention is the most important substance to humanity on planet Earth. It is the absolute most important. Now you have NI users and you have SE users. Then you have SI users and you have NE users. SI-NE users, okay, they are sources of attention, right? And the NI users are trying to get their attention specifically. And they do this by focusing their willpower in order to create an experience or some kind of show or some kind of action or reaction that would basically acquire the attention of an SI user, right? But then when you put it into a different context, let's look in the context of power. If someone is sending a message, the person who receives the message has the opportunity or the choice to respond, right? Therefore, the person who is in the responding position is the person who has all of the power, basically. They have all the power in the situation and within the relationship. This is why senders ultimately are powerless compared to the receivers who have all of the power, because they get to choose when to respond. This is one of the reasons why I make the argument that respect, for example, is never earned. I mean, my father recently told me that I have to earn his respect, and to which I responded, no, because I could work my butt off for you for 20 years and you'd still have the choice to not give me your respect anyway. Therefore, respect is never earned. It is only actually given, because there's no guarantee, no matter how hard I work, that you would still respect me afterwards, even if I did everything that you said. But again, because human beings, their natural proclivities, if I'm doing something that he asked me to do and I do everything he said, he's more likely to lose respect for me anyway, if you think about it. Therefore, respect is only given, it is never earned. Well, the same thing goes with attention. Attention is only given, it is never earned. Okay? Attention is only given, it is never earned. And an NI user can work so hard and put on this really, really great performance and put in all this effort, but at the end of the day, the attention that they receive is only given to them because the SI user chose to give them that attention. This is why SI users will always have more power in their relationships over NI users. SI users will always have power and be able to wield absolute power over NI users in relationships. Friendships, sexual relationships, parenting, whatever, it does not matter. The SI user is always the one who has power because they're the one who is always able to leverage that power at any given moment. And there's nothing the SE user can do about it. It's just the reality. Now, the SE user can go out of their way to put on a good show or to not fail and ultimately, do what they can to work for the attention of the SI user. But at the end of the day, it is still the SI user's choice to give their attention to the SE user. They still have that choice because they are in the position of the responder. This is why the greatest source of power amongst the 16 types is the INFP. Because the INFP is behind the scenes, so they are really, really responding. They're even more responding than progression types, and they are SI optimistic, and they are SI child, and at the same time, they have introverted feeling hero, and that's also optimistic, and you combine that on a cognitive loop, it's all about their mood and where they decide to put their attention towards if they are in the mood. Therefore, as a result, the INFP naturally has the most power out of all the 16 types. And it's no wonder that their cognitive origin is authority or power and authority, basically, as a result of that concept. Okay? So, because of that, they are the ones who generate the most power and wield the most power in the world. This is why I maintain that the person on the planet Earth who actually is the most powerful man on the planet is actually an INFP. And isn't it any wonder that the guy who runs the Rothschild family right now happens to be an INFP? Fascinating how that works. So yeah, the INFP. And INFP is the one who ends up wielding the most power out of all of the 16 types, much to the chagrin of everybody else. And that's just the natural way of things. Basically, the natural way, to the point where people cannot accept that. So why are we talking about attention when it comes to God functions? Because attention is ultimately what is produced by the parishioners or the followers or the members of the four temples, basically. And those four temples are paying attention to their God functions, okay? So what are the God functions of each of the four temples? So the soul temple God functions are extroverted intuition and introverted feeling. This is why the soul temple very much cares about intimacy and connection, which is attached to extroverted intuition. They very much care about character, which is attached to and justification, which is attached to introverted feeling. They want to feel good about themselves. They want to be good people, basically, right? That's why character matters so much to the soul temple. And obviously, you're a person of low character if you're not desirable or if you're not a good person, right? And that's why character matters to the soul temple, right? Those are their God functions. So regardless of their types, basically, regardless of any of these types, so like, for example, you have ESTPs, and they have extrovert intuition demon, but they very much care about wanting to be wanted. They do want to be wanted. It really is just a truth. It's just a fact, even though they have any demon. Or you have introverted feeling. They have FI trickster, and they very, very much care about character and being a good person. And, again, but they have introverted feeling trickster. Kind of sucks, from that perspective. Or you have the INFJ who has introverted feeling critic, but also extroverted intuition trickster and or nemesis, right? They still very much want to be wanted. They crave that connection. They crave to be a better person. And that's why they go out of their ways to, these two types go out of their ways to improve other people around them so that that can rub off on them, and then perhaps they too will improve, because if they figure that if they have something concrete to show for their actions at the end of the day, such as them going out of their way to improve other people in their lives, then perhaps that is their pathway from which they themselves can be improved, right? And then you have the God functions of the heart temple. The heart temple is all about passion, and the God functions for the heart temple is introvert intuition, which is all about personal freedom of choice, and it's attached to the cognitive origin of satisfaction, right? And then which is getting what you want, and being content with what you want, basically. And then their other God function is extroverted feeling, which is acceptance. And you look at INTJs, and they have extroverted feeling trickster, but at the end of the day, they still want to be accepted. Everything that they do in their life is centered around gaining a higher level of acceptability. And the cognitive origin of reverence is attached to the extroverted feeling God function for the heart temple, okay? And it's the same thing. Regardless of what the four types are as the members of the heart temple, they still, and regardless of their function stack, they still very much care about NI things and FE things. It's a really, really big deal, okay? And then let's move on to the mind temple. The mind temple is all about introverted thinking, and then also extroverted sensing. Extroverted sensing is attached to extroverted sensing. I go back and forth between which origins are attached to which for the mind temple. Because on one hand, I can make the argument that extroverted sensing is power, because in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, basically. He holds all of the power, right? And if you're introverted thinking, you like to be validated for your ideas, so validation would go there. But I can also make the opposite argument as well with the origins. So I'm still going back and forth on the mind temple perspective in terms of which cognitive origins attached to which. I'm sure Chris Taylor would have a huge opinion about that and would be not afraid to share that with me as I go. So, definitely that is the case. So yeah. Okay, let's see here. Trying to catch up on questions. Apparently the chat is very active this evening. Okay. So yeah, but again, because the mind temple, introverted thinking, they very much care about the truth. They very care about knowing the facts of the situation, facts in any light. And they also very much care about personal performance. Even though the INFP is a member of the mind temple with extroverted sensing trickster, they very much care about performance. Performance is very important. They're also kind of putting on a performance, especially as they're pulling the world over somebody's eyes and messing with people's contexts and perceptions. And that too, like them, as they marionette people from their power games that they play. They marionette them and mind control people, literally. INFPs are the best at mind control and narrative manipulation and propaganda and thereof. And because of that, they're able to, hold on to their cognitive origin of authority and hold on to their authority. But it's all still a performance, and they very much care about being a top performer. It just depends in terms of which arena that they're performing in. And then introverted thinking, from that perspective, again, it's all about knowing the facts. Then you have the body temple, which is focused on legacy and having a legacy of, purpose versus discovery. Purpose being, what have they achieved? Their purpose is towards their achievement, which is extroverted thinking. The God function of extroverted thinking, which is attached to the cognitive origin of purpose and ultimately achievement thereof. And even though INTPs and ESFJs don't really look like that they care a lot about achievement, they actually do. They very, very much care. I mean, look at Elon Musk and what he's doing. He very much cares about achievement because it's body temple level of achievement. It's part of his legacy, reaching a standard of achievement as a result of his legacy or to facilitate his legacy. That's what that means from that perspective. And then to go beyond that, we have introverted sensing, which is the cognitive function that is attached to discovery, right? So, yeah. Now, if you notice, like all these, like the perception and judgment origins are attached to perception and judgment functions. So I guess you can look at the mind temple, make the argument that extroverted sensing is definitely attached to power and authority because it is the perception origin, and the judging origin is introverted thinking, and thus it would definitely be attached to validation, which is a judgment, right? In terms of those cognitive origins. So yeah, and ultimately this makes up the foundation from which the temple wheels are derived from, and then that becomes the foundation for Octogram, basically. So God functions are it, and we were talking about input, process, output, and feedback. And input, process, output, feedback is all about like what we've been talking about in terms of the macro level of the science. The input is the Rosetta Stone, also known as cognitive origins, who's consuming what's producing what in terms of the individual functions. And then you have the God functions and how they're laid out around the temples, and ultimately where the temple wheels come from. That is the process. The output is our nature, which is the 16 types. And then we have the feedback, which is our nurture within the Octogram itself. And then we're actually working on a little visual right now using some shapes and whatnot to give our own visual representation of what the Octogram actually looks like and how all of these pieces interrelate with one another with some really cool visual aid that we'll be releasing in the very near future. I am about to release 2 new courses on top of Ego Hacking Your Fear, so a total of 3 courses basically coming out soon. The first one's going to be How to Type Yourself, which is going to be a free course that we're going to just be giving away to everybody, which is pretty awesome. And then we're going to have How to Type Yourself Octogram Edition, basically. That will be a paid course to help people type themselves from their Octogram perspective. And then also we are going to be naturally releasing Ego Hacking Your Fear. And we just filmed the ESFP portion of that course today. And it's a really long course. It's extremely long. It'll take you a while to actually get through it. It's at least 25 to 30 hours of video content in Ego Hacking Your Fear. And John Bodine and I have been co-filming that together. There's some really good banter. We've not really seen John on camera before, so it's like making his camera debut to the community. Everyone's going to be able to see John for the first time, so it's going to be pretty fun. It's going to be very fun as a result of that. So yeah. Anyway, be that as it may. So if you notice, like, if you put the God functions down on paper, you actually see that they have different relationships to one another. And then the God function relationships to one another also represent the relationships between the temples themselves, okay? So when you put the God functions together, you'll notice that some God functions are in cognitive axis with one another. Some of them are in cognitive orbit with one another. You have also cognitive reflection amongst one another. And then you also have the ability to understand a different relationship. And that different relationship is something I'll probably be discussing on the next cutting edge for April 2023, where I'm going to be going into basically chaos functions to a point, and what that actually that looks like. It's kind of like an entropic view of the temples, and basically the relationship between something that ends up decaying versus something that actually brings about order. We're going to be discussing that. But there are a few relationships between the functions themselves. And if you were to actually look at the individual God functions separated out amongst the temple functions, you'll notice a bunch of different patterns. But for example, let's look at the most obvious pattern. We already discussed axis, orbit, and reflection, but let's look at another obvious portion of it too. If you notice, for example, you have NE and FI, right? NE and FI together, and for example, that's pretty cool. You have And what relationship could NE and FI actually have, right? What relationship could FE and NI actually have? What is that possible relationship, right? Most people would look at the obvious, hero to parent relationship. That's definitely one existing relationship within the cognitive, within the God functions. But there's a lot more than that. You also have optimistic and pessimistic loops. Optimistic and pessimistic loops. And the thing is, though, is that this is like a fourth relationship with functions that we haven't exactly discussed. We've been talking so much about cognitive axis. We've been talking so much about cognitive orbit and cognitive reflection, but we really haven't actually identified this other relationship, even though we talk about it all the time. It's what Dave Powers discusses, when he's talking about jumping and cognitive looping, basically. But that's the idea that the hero and the child likes to party, in the same way that the parent and the inferior likes to party as well. And so with that being said, you can actually look at the God functions from the cognitive looping perspective. Because, like, for example, you have NE and FI, there's a looping relationship, between those functions and other functions within the temples as well. So it's kind of like, the hero is flying around the same world, and the child's like, oh, dang, that's pretty cool. Well, guess what? The God functions also act in the same way. And depending on the type of loop that there is, optimistic versus pessimistic loops, that basically becomes, the source of determining whether or not there's actually order between the God functions, and thus order between the temples, or if there is chaos between the God functions or chaos between the temples, right? So all of this is very important to understand when you're looking at, how the God functions actually function, but and their relationships. But be that as it may, really at a personal level, or at least from a nature perspective, when you're looking at a person and their type, you really have to understand that God functions absolutely matter. They absolutely matter, because you can utilize God functions in a way to ego hack them, in as much as you can use origins or the Rosetta Stone to ego hack them as well. But definitely from a God function perspective, if you know that like an ESTP still wants to be wanted, all you have to do is just include them in things, and then they'll love you forever, basically. You feed their God function. So the God function that they want to be fed on is definitely their expert intuition. All of them want to feel wanted. Or you talk about how they're great character, or you help them increase their character, basically from an FI perspective, which is a little bit more difficult and not so easy for ego hacking. But if you're doing like a long-term thing, it can be easily done. I mean, if you want to get Heart Temple's panties to drop, all you have to do is talk about how accepting you are of them. And it's all about acceptance, right? Acceptance. And they're all weak to the idea of acceptance, Although it's a little difficult for me, because like, when I'm in relationships, it's like, my FE child can't help but say, the buzzwords, well, yeah, like I accept you, because that would be true. And it's not me trying to like manipulate somebody. It's just something that naturally happens because I'm a member of the Heart Temple. I will use my God functions appropriately. This is one of the reasons why the golden pair is such a successful kind of relationship, because they both have the same God functions, and they can actually feed each other's God functions up on a silver platter, in as much as they can have a fair exchange of cognitive origins, provided that their octograms are compatible, right? That's how that works, right? So it is a very big thing. And it's not, and Immortal's just, making fun in the chat saying, I want to feel wanted, but here's another way of looking at it. It's more like they want to feel desired, right? They still want to be desired. They want to be desirable. Soul Temple wants to be desirable. And this absolutely makes sense, because God the Creator wants to be desirable. That's why he created humanity, so he could appear desirable to humanity. And he gave humanity sin nature, also known as solipsism, so that humanity's choice, because solipsism is what gives humanity free will. Angels don't exactly have free will, because they're pre-programmed to be idealistic and place other people above themselves. So their free will is based on spending their free will on others instead of spending their free will on themselves. So if they're pre-programmed to do that, they would never satisfy God the Creator's expert intuition function. They would never do that, right? But humanity does. Humanity satisfies God the Creator's extrovert intuition function because humanity has sin nature. Humanity has solipsism. They put self above tribe. And then from that perspective, because humanity has free will, because humanity has the free will to be a total hoe and worship something else instead of worshiping God the Creator and giving God the Creator attention, for example, its attention from an NESI axis perspective, humanity ultimately has to make a choice towards God the Creator's direction because he is desirable to humanity and what he has done to make himself desirable to humanity, so that they will willfully choose him, because they will willfully let go of their self above tribe solipsism and then gain the learned behavior of tribe above self, with tribe being God the Creator. And then ultimately humanity will submit to God the Creator and actually choose him and actually want him, basically. And this is playing out basically with how the soul temple works out with the expert intuition God function. That's literally how it works out. And it's the same theme. It's the same theme regardless. It's all the same. Everything that plays out in your own little family between, husband, wife, and children, all these different roles we play are all the exact same roles that God the Creator is also playing with his creations. It's the same thing, all these roles, and it's like this big role play, a big giant role play, okay? So that's where it is, It's kind of that's what it is, so, but heart temple's looking for acceptance. That's just kind of a thing. So anyway, when you're looking at people's God functions, understand what they are. Desirability and self-worth is everything to soul temple. Personal freedom and acceptance is everything to heart temple. So give these things to these two temples. The truth, giving the truth to mind temple, as well as giving them and helping them perform better and increasing their performance or reacting well to their performance, is also something that means everything to them. And then body temple, help them achieve and give them the respect according to those achievements, and then also give them a great experience, make them comfortable, help them discover new things, those types of things. And then basically from an ego hacking perspective, you have them. You completely and utterly have these people, just from a God function perspective, regardless of their type. If they are members of these temples, they very much care about these God functions. They may be producing or consuming God functions differently, but they're different sides of their mind because they're still part of the same temple. It still applies all the way across the board. Doesn't matter what side of the mind they're in, it still applies. It really still applies. So God functions is another thing that just doesn't change. And this can actually be used as a way to type people in the same way that we use cognitive origin. And cognitive origin doesn't change. God functions do not change, even though we actually know that cognitive origins actually become God functions from the temple perspective, right? That's how it works. So that's why it is incredibly, incredibly important, from a God function perspective. I'm releasing a series about God functions to go in a little bit deeper and talk about each of the 16 types, and how they utilize God functions and why it's so important to them and what their struggles are with God functions. But you can ease the pain of your fellow man by serving up their God functions to them on a silver platter. You can even use that from an ego hacking perspective. You can use that from a personal growth perspective to grow them as make their lives even better, right? And that's absolutely everything. And if you haven't figured that out, well, maybe you probably actually should figure that out. It's a really, really big deal, and it's so interesting because now we can actually see just how enmeshed humanity actually is compared to everybody else, which is also pretty fantastic. So. But yeah, all right. So it's kind of a bit of a shorter episode today, but it's mostly a foundational episode for setting up for the next episode. But do you have? Okay, so Immortal asked the question. So based on what you're saying, Chase, does that mean women are the freest then? They are the freest with their choice, but remember, a promise becomes a prison. So eventually they have to make a choice, and they make a choice of what man they commit to, but that commitment is in itself a prison, right? So you might want to think about that. Whereas men have less choice, so it seems like they are in a prison, but then as they get older and more capable, they end up having more options, so they end up becoming less of a prison, okay? Again, it's the first will be last and last will be first. It goes back down to the rite of passage. Men start out as tribe above self, and they have their rite of passage, and they learn how to be self above tribe. They actually learn how to engage and lead into their own solipsism. Whereas women start out very solipsistic, but then they have their rite of passage, and then they end up getting the learned behavior of tribe above self, and they have to end up learning how to submit. And it's extremely scary and terrifying for a woman to submit to a man. But that's what they all eventually have to learn how to do. They all have to learn how to do it. Otherwise, they're not going to be happy at all in this life. They'll end up alone in their 40s, all used up, and with nothing but, animals to keep them company. And they'll die alone, basically. And childless, and no one to watch over them in their old age. And then, it's just a life of hedonism, and nothing actually matters, basically. Because, they don't have any children. They don't have nothing to look forward to. It's like they've had all their dreams and aspirations ripped from them because they spent their choices on the wrong things in their youth. Because women have a problem, their bodies will expire. They're born with value, so they have to work to preserve that value. Men are not born with value, they have to work to build that value, right? That is the male burden of performance, right? So as a result, while they have the most solipsism, that doesn't necessarily, they certainly are the freest, but they end up having less choices. They're freer, but they have less choices. Men are not so free, but they have more choices. You see, so that's again, the first will be last and last will be first, and that's what that concept actually means. All right. Okay, let's move on to the next. All right, here we go. Okay, no, that's not an actual. My Pop-Tarts are ready. Thank you. Thank you very much. I don't eat Pop-Tarts, though. So men basically have to learn how to sin. That's correct. Yes, that is correct. All right, let's move on. Easy Bake Oven. Yeah, never not have the Easy Bake Oven. I did have an Easy Bake Oven. At least my sister did, but I would commandeer it and use it all the time as a small child and make myself snacks in her Easy Bake Oven. It was amazing. I enjoyed the Easy Bake Oven for sure. So yeah. All right, cool. Does anyone have any questions relating to this cutting edge before we move on? Any questions? Any questions? Yeah, it's like I said, folks. It's a much shorter episode this time. But I had to get this foundation in the cutting edge first because we're releasing a lot of God function related content in the near future, and the next episode I hope to be addressing the chaos functions. I may actually save it for later though. We'll see. But yeah, it's just really important that you guys look at the God functions, look at the relationships that they have among one another, and you'll actually see some really cool patterns. And from an ego hacking perspective, you'll actually see how you can ego hack other people through their God functions, and as much as you would be able to through their cognitive origin as well, because the cognitive origins are linked directly to their God functions. So yeah, questions? Oh, you had an Easy Bake Oven too. Okay, fair enough. Trying to scroll up. Oh, Chris Taylor saying it's still a debate. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, and INTJ wants to be accepted. Yes, they absolutely want to be accepted. My God. Okay. Why are you calling them God functions? It's because they are the things that each of the members of the temples actually worship. They're the functions that the temples worship. I alluded to this many, many, many years ago, probably like 4 years ago, basically. Actually, where was I? Oh, yeah. I alluded to this in February 2019 on the YouTube channel. I think it was 2019. Yeah, February 2019 on the YouTube channel is when I first started talking about God functions. And again, it's because these are the functions that the four temples pay attention to the most and are trying to seek out the most. They're like the cognitive origins of the temples themselves, but from a functional perspective, basically. And we just look at what the functions themselves represent from an individual perspective, like what we call the Legos. If you were to open up your companion guides for how to type yourself, basically with Socrates on the front of the companion guide, and then you just go into like the second to last section of the companion guide, and you'll see, like, as it's explained, the definitions of the functions, optimistic versus pessimistic definitions of functions. You'll basically see how each of those individual Legos are, with those words, like NE is the word could, for example, well, again, that translates into other words like desirability, like those synonyms. Basically, if you provide those things or take away those things to each person from a God function perspective, you can facilitate an ego hacking action, or actually just promoting their general well-being, or maybe your general well-being would be promoted as a result of having a relationship with that person, basically. All right, so we have another question. Okay. So the God functions of the heart temple are NIFE. That is correct. Yes. What does pessimistic or optimistic looping ultimately produce? Pessimistic looping produces... well, it depends. I mean, optimistic looping is typically seen as producing chaos, but then pessimistic looping is often seen as producing order. And we can actually see this when you look at the gateway functions versus the guidance functions. If you guys don't know about gateway versus guidance functions, I highly recommend you watch or read the article at csjoseph.life/blog that John Bodine put together. Just search for gateway or guidance functions and just read his blog on the subject. So there we go. Yes, SI aspirational can be an amazing memory. That's true. All right, cool. All right. Yeah, it's just a little shorter episode this time, guys. But I wanted to get this foundation done because I've broken up some of the parts that I had prepared for this lecture into two parts, but to get into the other one, the explanation would have taken a lot longer and a lot of visual aids, and it would have probably turned into a 2-hour episode. So I had to separate out some of the content, especially with the episodes that we're going to be releasing on YouTube as well. But I just wanted to get this introduction out of the way so that our paid members can kind of get an idea of kind of how God functions work, where they come from, why they matter, how they affect people in general. But I'm going to be getting way more specific in upcoming episodes that we're going to be releasing on YouTube in the very near future. So thanks for watching and listening, folks, and I'll see you guys next month for Cutting Edge April 2023. Later.